You thought spiritual awakening would set your soul on fire. You expected it to fill you with boundless energy, crystal clear purpose, and an unshakable drive to transform your life and perhaps the world around you. Instead, you're sitting here, staring at your vision board with the emotional investment of someone reading a grocery list, wondering where the hell your motivation went and why enlightenment feels suspiciously like existential exhaustion. If this resonates, if you're nodding along while simultaneously feeling too drained to even nod enthusiastically, then you need to understand what I have observed happening to the psyche during these profound transitions. Because what you're experiencing isn't a spiritual failure or a sign that your awakening was somehow defective. It's actually the most predictable, necessary, and ultimately transformative phase of consciousness evolution that nobody talks about. There's a cruel irony embedded in the awakening process that can leave even the most seasoned spiritual seekers feeling completely blindsided. We're conditioned to believe that enlightenment equals endless enthusiasm, that seeing through the illusions of ordinary consciousness should naturally result in superhuman motivation and laser-focused clarity about our life's mission. Yet for many of us, especially those who are naturally introspective and psychologically sensitive, the experience can feel like the exact opposite. I remember speaking with a woman who had just completed what she described as the most profound spiritual retreat of her life. She had experienced genuine ego dissolution, touched what felt like universal consciousness, and returned home absolutely certain that she had finally cracked the code of existence. 3 weeks later, she could barely summon the energy to shower, let alone pursue the ambitious spiritual teaching career she had envisioned during her peak experience. Her exact words still echo in my mind. I thought awakening would make me feel more alive, not like I'm sleepwalking through someone else's life. This bewildering post-awakening lethargy isn't some modern spiritual anomaly. It's a profound psychological phenomenon that I have come to understand intimately through decades of working with the human psyche. Though I rarely use the flowery language we associate with contemporary spirituality, I have recognized that when the vast unconscious realms begin flooding into conscious awareness, the psyche undergoes what can only be described as a complete operating system overhaul. The problem is that your ego, that familiar sense of I that has been running the show for decades, suddenly finds itself in completely foreign territory. It's like a seasoned ship captain who wakes up one morning to discover that all the navigation instruments have been replaced with equipment from an alien civilization. The old maps no longer make sense, the familiar stars have rearranged themselves, and the compass is pointing to magnetic north on a planet that no longer seems to follow the same physical laws. This is why your motivation has seemingly evaporated. It's not that you've lost your drive, it's that the entire motivational framework that once powered your ambitions has been fundamentally dismantled. Every goal you once pursued with passion was fueled by a particular version of yourself, a carefully constructed identity that awakening has revealed to be more fluid and illusory than you ever imagined. Think about it. Before your awakening, your motivation likely sprang from a complex web of desires, fears, and unconscious drives. You wanted to succeed, to prove your worth. You chased achievements to gain love and recognition. You accumulated experiences and possessions to fill an unnamed void within you. You operated from what I call the persona, that socially acceptable mask we wear to navigate the world and maintain our sense of belonging. But awakening is like a powerful solvent that begins dissolving this persona layer by layer. Suddenly, you're less invested in impressing others, less concerned with winning the conventional games of society, and significantly less motivated by external validation. This isn't because you've become lazy or depressed in the clinical sense. It's because you've begun to see through the game itself, recognizing its rules, its illusions, and often its ultimately hollow rewards. Without the familiar mask of the persona, your old goals and ambitions often don't fit anymore. They were tailored to a version of you that, in a very real psychological sense, no longer exists or is rapidly dissolving. You might feel like an actor who has stepped off one stage, wandered into an entirely different theater, and can't remember what play you're supposed to be performing or even what character you're meant to embody. This is precisely why you feel so unmotivated by your previous standards. You haven't lost your essential drive. Rather, you've outgrown the specific type of fuel that used to disempower it. The ego's desperate need for achievement, recognition, and control simply doesn't resonate with the deeper parts of you that awakening has brought online. I believe that our ultimate purpose isn't to endlessly serve the ego's demands for validation and success, but to integrate it harmoniously with what I term the self, that transcendent center within us that connects to something infinitely larger than our individual concerns. This self doesn't operate on the currency of status, external approval, or the ego's frantic need for constant clarity and control. It seeks authentic expression, genuine contribution, and alignment with deeper patterns of meaning that often can't be captured in traditional goal-setting frameworks. Once awakening cracks open the door to this self, your psyche embarks on an instinctive recalibration process. It begins rejecting anything that feels inauthentic, forced, or purely ego-driven. This internal audit can extend to your career, your relationships, your long-held dreams, and even that vision board you created during your more conventionally ambitious phase. This is why the awakening process feels simultaneously liberating and profoundly disorienting. You're free from the exhausting chase for external validation, but you're also temporarily untethered from the familiar structures that once provided direction and meaning. Here's where most people get stuck, and where my insights become absolutely crucial. If you stop here, if you interpret this phase of disillusionment as the final destination, you can fall into several dangerous traps. Some people convince themselves that nothing matters, that it's all just an illusion, and therefore the most enlightened response is complete disengagement. They mistake healthy detachment for apathetic withdrawal. But the self, that deeper intelligence within you, wants something entirely different. It doesn't seek to escape the world, but to engage with it more authentically. It doesn't reject human experience, but desires to redefine your role within it from a place of genuine integrity and soul-aligned purpose. To access this new way of being, however, you must navigate what I describe as a liminal space, a threshold realm between your old identity and whatever you're becoming. This phase is rarely discussed in spiritual circles because it's not particularly glamorous or social media friendly. It doesn't look like meditating blissfully on a mountaintop or having profound revelations under a Bodhi tree. More often it looks like sitting in profound silence, feeling a deep sense of unknowing, perhaps unable to articulate what you're experiencing while the rest of the world continues its frantic busyness around you. You're no longer the old ego-driven version of yourself, but you haven't yet fully anchored into this new self-led way of being. This transitional space is not a sign of failure. It's a sacred rite of passage that our hyper-productive, action-oriented modern culture has forgotten how to honor. We've lost touch with the wisdom traditions that understood the necessity of these profound pauses, these fertile voids where transformation can actually occur. I have a term for the psychological principle at work here, enantiodromia, which describes how any extreme tendency will eventually flip into its opposite. When you awaken, your inner pendulum often swings dramatically from the ego's relentless striving to a deep, soul-level stillness. You might shift from an I must do everything and control everything mindset to a bewildered, why bother doing anything at all state. This swing, unsettling as it may be, is actually sacred. It's a natural mechanism through which psychological balance is restored. In ancient wisdom traditions, this phase is often symbolized as the hermit's journey, the descent into the underworld, or the necessary death that precedes authentic rebirth. Consider the metaphor of metamorphosis. The caterpillar doesn't simply grow wings and become a butterfly. It must first dissolve completely into an undifferentiated soup within the cocoon. No longer a caterpillar, not yet a butterfly, just organic potential reorganizing itself according to entirely new patterns. This is precisely where the ego panic sets in. The ego craves action, clear identity, measurable progress, and familiar goals. But the self whispers a different message. Let go, be still, trust the process. I'm building something far more resilient and authentic here. This is also where much of popular spirituality fails us. The follow your bliss and high vibes only mantras, while well-intentioned, can actually bypass the essential shadow work that I consider non-negotiable for genuine wholeness. If you try to skip the darkness, you inevitably miss the gold hidden within it. The apparent void you're experiencing is actually fertile ground where the unconscious finds finally has the space and silence it needs to rise into conscious awareness, you're not failing at spirituality. You're metabolizing lifetimes of conditioning, unexpressed potential, and disowned aspects of yourself. Your psyche is incredibly wise. It will sometimes intentionally shut down your old forms of motivation and mental clarity to force you to slow down, feel deeply, and witness what's been buried in your unconscious. This isn't punishment, it's sophisticated inner healing. Here's where the magic begins to reveal itself. When you finally stop resisting the void, when you surrender to the stillness and the not knowing, something extraordinary starts to emerge. Motivation returns, but it feels completely different this time. It's not the anxious, grasping energy of the ego. It's not performative or seeking external validation. It's definitely not the frantic hustle culture that leaves you depleted and hollow. Instead, it's something ancient, quiet, and profoundly authentic. A soul-led movement that feels less like chasing external goals and more like remembering a deep inner calling. I call this the emergence of the self as a living, breathing inner compass rather than an abstract spiritual concept. This new form of motivation doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It's more like a gentle inner pull, a subtle knowing that guides you not toward frantic activity, but toward conscious participation with life's unfolding. You stop trying to force outcomes and start responding to the invitations that existence offers. Living from the self doesn't mean you'll feel conventionally motivated every single day. You're still human, still subject to natural rhythms and cycles. But what you likely won't feel anymore is that gnawing sense of inner betrayal, that exhausting experience of dragging yourself through a life that fundamentally doesn't fit. Instead, you might notice yourself naturally drawn to create without needing external validation. You begin saying no with greater ease to opportunities that don't truly resonate, even if they look impressive on paper. You start following the breadcrumbs of authentic curiosity rather than predetermined shoulds and musts. This is the new fuel, not adrenaline but alignment, not anxiety but authenticity. I call this living symbolically, where you begin trusting your inner imagery, your dreams, the strange synchronicities that appear, and those undeniable gut feelings as valid forms of guidance. Practically, this might mean asking yourself different questions. Instead of, what should I do? You might inquire, what is gently calling to me? Instead of, what's the master plan? You explore, where is life nudging me right now? Instead of, how can I prove myself? You wonder, what feels most honest for me to express in this moment? This shift doesn't mean abandoning ambition entirely. It means transforming its very nature. Ambition filtered through the self becomes devotion to truth, to growth, to serving something larger than your individual concerns. And this soul-aligned energy often accomplishes far more with much less inner friction than the ego's desperate striving ever could. The beautiful irony is that when you stop chasing motivation and start trusting the deeper currents of your being, you often find yourself naturally engaged in activities that feel genuinely fulfilling. Not because you feel obligated, but because your whole being resonates with a deep, unequivocal yes. If you've been worried that your spark has permanently extinguished after awakening, consider this possibility. Perhaps only the old ego-driven fire burned out, and it needed to in order to make space for you to discover a much deeper, more sustainable flame, one that doesn't flicker when external circumstances change because it's rooted in something unchanging within you. This isn't the end of your awakening journey, it's the profound beginning of your authentic becoming. As you learn to navigate this new terrain, free from the ego's relentless demands, you'll discover that motivation arising from the self speaks in an entirely different language. It doesn't shout or coerce. It doesn't rely on fear or the promise of external rewards. Instead, it whispers, nudges, and communicates through subtle feelings of rightness that settle in your bones when you're aligned, or gentle internal friction when you're moving away from your authentic path. Learning to discern and trust these almost imperceptible cues becomes one of the most vital skills you'll develop. It requires creating pockets of inner quiet amidst the world's noise so these delicate signals aren't drowned out. You might find yourself inexplicably drawn to new creative pursuits, or suddenly feeling energetic drain around activities that once seemed acceptable. These aren't random whims. They're sophisticated communications from your inner guidance system, gently steering you toward experiences and expressions that will nourish your growth and allow your unique essence to flourish. One of the most liberating aspects of this self-led existence is realizing that consistent, high-octane motivation isn't the natural state of an authentic life. The ego operates on linear timelines, demanding constant progress and measurable output. The self moves in harmony with organic cyclical rhythms. There will be seasons of intense creativity and inspired action where you feel powerful currents carrying you forward. Equally, there will be essential seasons of quiet integration, deep rest, and what might appear to the external world as doing nothing. This isn't regression. It's an integral part of the process. Just as a farmer knows there's a time for planting and a time for letting fields lie fallow, your soul understands the necessity of these periods for assimilating experiences and gathering energy for the next wave of growth. Learning to honor these rhythms is a radical act of self-love in a world that equates stillness with stagnation. As the authentic self increasingly guides your choices, you may find that your priorities diverge from established norms and expectations. This requires quiet courage, as friends, family, or colleagues might not understand the shifts they witness. There can be pressure to conform, to slip back into more familiar roles. The practice becomes continually tuning into your inner compass, that unwavering sense of true north provided by the self. It means learning to validate yourself from within, rather than seeking constant external approval. It's about choosing the path that feels deeply resonant, even if it means walking a less traveled road. The reward is an unshakable sense of integrity, a profound peace that comes from living in alignment with your deepest values, and the quiet joy of knowing you're finally honoring the unique individual you came here to be. That bewildering numbness gradually gives way to something entirely different, a quiet, yet deeply satisfying sense of purpose. This isn't necessarily the grand, world-altering mission the ego might have fantasized about. More often, it's discovered in the quality of your presence, in authentic expression, and in the depth of your connections. Purpose shifts from being an external goal to achieve to an internal state, to embody. It becomes less about what you do and more about how you are, and how that authentic being naturally informs your actions. True success from the self's perspective is measured by internal metrics: the depth of your peace, the authenticity of your expression, the quality of your relationships, your capacity for compassion, the meaning you derive from daily life, and the feeling of genuine alignment with your values. Fulfillment is no longer a distant destination, but a state accessible in the present moment through conscious presence and heartfelt engagement with life. It might be found in profound connection during a shared meal, quiet satisfaction in completing creative work that reflects your soul, or simple joy in witnessing beauty with an open heart. This transformation touches every aspect of life, including relationships. As you anchor more deeply in authenticity, superficial interactions and connections based on codependency or ego validation become increasingly unsatisfying. Instead, you're drawn to relationships rooted in genuine presence, mutual respect, and soul-level resonance. Some existing relationships may naturally fall away, not through conflict, but because the energetic foundation that once sustained them is no longer present. While this can bring sadness, it creates space for nourishing connections that support your ongoing growth and unfolding. If there's one thread weaving through every aspect of this post-awakening journey, it's the continuous invitation to trust. Trust in the wisdom of the self, that deep knowing that guides even when your rational mind can't see the full picture. Trust in life's unfolding process, believing that detours and uncertainties serve your evolution. Trust that you're always supported, even in moments of apparent isolation. This isn't blind faith, but trust born from experience, from accumulated moments when you listened to that quiet inner voice and found it leading toward greater truth and alignment. It involves surrendering the ego's need for control and guarantees, stepping into the unknown with courage and openness. There will be times when the path seems shrouded in uncertainty, when conditioning screams for guarantees. In these moments, The practice is returning to your center, to that quiet place where the self resides, and simply breathing, listening, trusting that the next step will be revealed in perfect timing. This cultivation of trust is perhaps the greatest gift of the awakening journey, allowing you to navigate life's complexities, not with fear and contraction, but with adventure, resilience, and profound peace that comes from knowing you're an integral part of something vast, wise, and ultimately benevolent. Your lack of motivation after spiritual awakening isn't a problem to be fixed. It's a sacred transition to be honored, a necessary death that precedes your authentic rebirth. The caterpillar's dissolution isn't a failure of metamorphosis. It's the very mechanism through which transformation occurs. Trust the process, trust the pause, trust that something magnificent is being born in the fertile darkness of your apparent emptiness. Your motivation will return, but it will be unrecognizably transformed, rooted not in ego's desperate grasping, but in soul's patient, powerful, and endlessly creative expression through the beautiful, irreplaceable vessel of your human life.